Hi, my name is Amber Lunas. I'm going to talk about how to make a newspaper. I'll discuss the areas of the writer, editor, and photographers, and also how to do advertising, photo placement, stories, and then piecing everything together, getting it ready to be sent out to the distributors. This is an analysis for consecutive interpreting 2.1 assignment. The different components of this piece were structured so that you could see how a newspaper was made, who was involved, and what different things went into it actually getting started and finished. How we could set this up is we could begin by listing all the different workers used for the newspaper. We could list the writer, the editor, and the photographer. Maybe in sign language we could use that as some role shifts. We have the writer, the photographer, and the editor. And then going back to the writer, we could go ahead and list their job duties. Starting with finding the businesses that would like to do the advertising, then actually going out and writing the stories, then having the space now in the newspaper and building around the advertisements so they know how much room they have for their actual story. And then you could do another role shift. Now that we're the editor, we can go through all the different jobs that the editor is responsible for. They're fixing the problems, the technical issues with the actual writer's pieces, and then they're creating sizes for the writers that they can put their stories into the newspaper and have everything fit around the advertisements. They're figuring out what positions they're going to need for the photos. They're putting the tape around the photos so that they pop out in the newspaper, and then the actual printing of the pages and the distributing. And then now that we're moving on to the photographer, which is one of the smaller jobs in the newspaper department, you can see how they actually take the pictures and then go back to the editor and how he then positions those into the newspaper. Now that we have all the steps and who does those steps, we can use some sort of visual key as to how they're placed in the newspaper. Now that we have our photos, our spots for the photos, and we have our advertisements, we can talk about how the writer goes and kind of moves around the advertisements and how everything's kind of centered and focused on those advertisements. And then you could also use a sort of timeline, sitting back and saying how, we're going to go out and find advertisers, we're going to send the writers with stories, we're going to give the photographer space for the pictures, and then now that we're at this medium space, we can talk about how everything's pieced together, and then leaning forward almost as a finish line, we can discuss how it's sent out to the distributors, printed and copied. So we actually have a timeline here, and we also have a timeline that we could be using here, and this goes along with the three different people, which works nicely, that are working for the newspaper. And if we did decide to do this sort of timeline, we could also do sort of a setback for perhaps the photographer who doesn't have as large of a role, and then the middle as the writer who is taking on a few different tasks, and then the editor now who's was mentioned in the beginning and also now again at the end and is piecing everything together. So either one of those things could really work well for the ASL interpretation of the 2.1 for consecutive.